Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about picks and picking. Things I'm going to talk about are just how to hold a pick, basically, some factors in choosing a pick, shape, size, thickness, materials. Also, the shape of the point of the pick specifically. We'll go a little bit more in depth for that. We'll talk about common ways that you can modify a pick to better suit it to your personal application. And then we're going to go more in depth in picking technique. So, more in depth, how to hold it for more advanced players. So, let's get started. Let's try to wrap it up concisely yet detailed. So, basics of how to hold a pick. For this demonstration, I'm going to use one of the most popular kinds of picks you can find. This is just, I would describe this as a fender shape because they're associated with it. I think this is actually a Dunlop, and it's a heavy gauge. We'll explain more about that in a second. But the best way, the most common way, I should say, I'm not one of those, there's a right and a wrong way to do it. It's just there are common ways and less common. There are effective ways and ineffective ways. There's comfortable ways and uncomfortable ways. So anyway, very common way to hold a pick. Think of your picking hand. I'm going to use my right hand because I'm right-handed. When you relax your hand, there's going to be a natural curve to your fingers. No one relaxes like this unless you're extremely frightened or stressed. So there's a natural curve to your fingers if it's relaxed, but it's not quite curved enough to meet where your thumb overlaps. So you just want to curl your finger just enough that when you drop the thumb naturally, it crosses like that. Okay, the pick is going to go in between there. For now, I would suggest holding the pick close to the side of this finger, of this index finger. The point of the pick should match the point of your finger and the thumb on top like that. That's relaxed. It's natural. There's a space here. It's not super clinched. My fingers are not tight this way like a fist, and they're not stretched out tight that way. Everything's loose, just firm enough to hold the pick in place. Okay, that's really comfortable. Some people describe it as looking like a flagpole if your thumb is going up and the point of the pick is like a flag sticking out. Okay, so common misconceptions are holding it like between the pads of both fingers. That often actually strains this muscle here and your wrist. I don't like that. You can try it if it works for you, but I wouldn't suggest it. I would try holding it a little bit on the side of the finger rather than the pad underneath. It's just a little bit more natural. Okay? So, also quickly, I would go into this a lot more in depth if I were teaching you privately, but the main areas that pick technique comes from is your shoulder, your elbow, your forearm, and your wrist. Okay, the shoulder is not that engaged, but it should be loose. You don't want it to be tense. The elbow is usually used for basic strumming. The forearm is engaged when you have to, for example, like pick a short distance very quickly, like picking one string. And the wrist, actually, in this kind of like frisbee throwing motion, is engaged when you're doing a snap across, like not all the strings, but a few strings, like a funk rhythm, etc. That's a snap of the wrist outwards combined with the bones in the forearm twisting back and forth like that for a very quick snap. All of those, elbow, forearm, wrist, they're all going to be engaged to some extent, but some areas more than others depending on what you're doing at the time. So let's come back to technique at the end and let's just discuss the picks for a second. So common factors: shape, size, thickness, and material. Those are all going to affect how it feels and how it sounds. The feel and the sound, according to your own preference, is what you should focus on. If you're having trouble choosing a pick, picking a pick, yeah, I guess that's kind of funny, then just go to a guitar store, any one will do, or online, and find like a small package of assorted picks, and just lay them all out on the table. Try all of them. At the end, hopefully, I will be able to quickly demonstrate different picks that I like, and they all sound they all sound and feel very different to me. Like on the end of all these stages of recording gear that I have, it's going to be a lot more compressed than in the same room. So maybe you can hear it, maybe you can't, but at least we'll try it. But if you try it at home, I promise you're going to notice a big difference between even very similar picks. Okay, so let's discuss shape, size, thickness, material with this pick, and then I'll show you some of my favorites. This is the most popular shape. Many people just call it a Fender shape because Fender popularized it. This is the Jim Dunlop version, and it's a heavy gauge. So the shape is very natural. You know, it has space to hold the pick on top, and then it has a point, a sharper point, which is where you actually strike the string. Overall size can affect how it feels because it weighs more. It fills more of your hand, more of your grip. Also, it can affect the flexibility, which is a very important factor in picks. Because just think about it. If there's a longer distance here and the material is otherwise the same, you have more leverage to bend, right? So sometimes a longer distance this way can make it feel more flexible. Sometimes a wider pick can make it feel less flexible. Okay, the thickness, that's what some people call the gauge, and this, it just says heavy. You might have heavy, medium, light. You might have thick, medium, thin. You might have specific millimeters mentioned, like 0.75, 1 millimeter, 1.5, things like that. If it's thicker, it's less flexible. Flexibility is really the key here. If it's more flexible, it's great for beginners, or it's great for people who are just doing a lot of strumming because the pick itself absorbs some of the force of your strum striking the strings. Many beginners, they actually play far too hard. It takes them a lot of time to control and lighten up their grip. Often for an advanced player, the way that you change volume on the guitar, especially acoustic guitar, but the dynamics in general on any stringed instrument, is just by gripping, that's just a G chord that I'm strumming. I could do the same light strum, and if I make a fist and really grip the pick, you can hear that it gets a lot stronger and a lot louder versus very light playing. Light, strong. That's just grip. It has nothing to do with me, exerting my elbow any more than it was. So, in general, beginners usually like thin picks. Also, just rhythm players, lead players, and more advanced players often like thicker picks because there's no give to it, there's no delay in the response, and you can also, now that you've learned how to relax, you can use a very light, relaxed technique, but the pick still drives the strings hard enough so that you can get a strong tone, and it's usually a little bit darker too. So there's a lot of pros to using a heavy pick if you have a technique to match it. Lastly, material. Lastly for me, I'm sure there's a lot of other ways you could describe picks if you wanted. The material affects all of those things: sound, feel, and flexibility. This is probably called Tortex. It's a synthetic material designed to imitate what tortoise shell sounds and feels like and wears like. I like it, but I think it wears down too fast. As you play the pick, it's scraping away some of the material, and you wind up with a pick that's actually thinner than you started with, and so it doesn't sound the same anymore. So I like other materials that are a little bit harder wearing, longer lasting, etc. Okay, so let me describe different picks that I like, and that will also be a segue into the pick point shape, the point of the pick. Basically, it can be sharp, it can be blunt, and then where the shoulders of the pick meet can be rounded or sharp, even if the angle is still the same, right? So you have kind of the distance between these shoulders, the overall angle, and then sharpness or bluntness of the actual point itself. Those Fender picks are great, but my technique evolved over time, and I ended up using these teardrop picks. They're smaller. The point is softer, and I also started using heavier picks. Eventually, I started using the backwards side of both the Fender shapes and these, so that it was a very broad surface striking the string, so I got a really dark, even tone. Stevie Ray Vaughan has done that. Pat Metheny has done that. George Lynch has done that. So a lot of people do it, but I started evolving and just saying, why can't I just find a pick where the point is already that size rather than taking a pick and using it as it's not intended? So then I kind of started preferring this kind of shape. Most people would describe it as a mandolin pick, because mandolin players are looking for a really strong and dark tone because the instrument is already so bright and so light sounding and so airy. This is the Golden Gate Extra Stiff, so I think it's 1.3 millimeters. It's a very stiff pick, but it's also just a basic like Tortex style synthetic tortoise material. So I love how these sound at first, and I love how they feel at first, but then the more you pick, the more the edge starts to wear away, and it starts to sound like a thinner pick than you started with. So then I eventually evolved to, these are ones that I'm trying out. This is the ProPlec by D'Andrea. Many people would probably just call this a bass pick if they just looked at it, because this size and shape of pick is common with bass players. They have much larger strings that they're trying to drive with the pick, so they might need a bigger pick to match. This, I think, is overkill for almost everybody, including myself. It's a little bit unwieldy for my hands and feels a bit heavy, but the tone is really great, and the way it releases the string is nice too. Even though it's a satin finish, it used to be a little bit more glossy. So, leading to how to modify a pick for use. My very first guitar teacher, he would always cut at least a third, sometimes in half, of the basic Fender shape here. And he would also take like the sharp edge of a mechanical pencil and just put scratches all over it to make the grip better for him. So I was taking that ProPlec pick that's kind of almost a bass size and just cutting off like the top third, the top quarter, top third. So then it's still, the dimension this way is still large, and it's still very thick, and it still has a very blunt tip, which is great for how I'm using it, which I'll explain in a second. But it's just a little bit more comfortable, a little bit lighter. So that's what I've been using recently. But again, that's for a very specific style of guitar. I'm playing kind of a like electric jazz guitar, and I'm trying to go for a tone that is dark and smooth, has a lot of fundamental, not a lot of overtones. So that kind of brings us back to technique, more advanced technique, not just how to hold it. So the three most common ways to hold a pick in regards to the angle against the strings are flat, angled up, angled down. Like that's all I would describe it. So when I'm playing jazz stuff, I'm usually trying to make the pick strike the string parallel. Like the plane of the pick is parallel to the plane of the string. If you have any geometry nerds out there. So that's great when you just want a really dark tone and you want a smooth release. It's dark as long as the pick is thick enough and large enough. If the pick is very flexible, that might sound lighter because it's going to add a lot of pick flex. Another common way is to angle down. That's probably the most common way to play for electric guitar players, because it's great for rock, funk, pop, blues, etc. It's great for all popular styles of music because it allows you to kind of slice across the plane of the string rather than just slap past it. And that's really great for our old friend, the classic Fender pick shape. Because it has a sharper point, it's great when you angle it. The sharper point is also smaller where the shoulders meet, which means that you can glide past the string easily because there's less distance to cross. The flip side of that is that the point is taller, let's call it that, so that if you're picking in between strings, it might go deeper in between them, which feels like it slows you down. You know, if you had a more blunt pick shape, that would glide across strings a little bit more smoothly, right? But, you know, you have to, again, factor all this in. Just choose a pick based on what you think when you're playing your favorite style, your favorite song, what you think sounds best and what you think feels best. So another option would be angling up, and that's the least common in my opinion, but you find some very great players who do that. This backwards angle, though, is something that George Benson does, and a few other players. But George Benson, for example, his thumb kind of hyperextends, so he can hold the pick between the pads of both fingers without straining his wrist. And so then he's picking at an up angle, but very comfortably and naturally. So you can try it, but I would suggest that you don't default to that. Just try it as an option, but it'll probably not feel very comfortable unless, like I've seen some people who are Fender Strat players and they use their guitar really high, so they have it strapped up like this and the neck is out parallel with the floor. Then you can kind of do the up angle thing without it being too much of a strain on your wrist, but then maybe you're, straining your shoulders, things like that. So it all factors in the shape of the pick and how you hold it and how you attack the strings. For me, using a medium size and shape with a heavy gauge, it's thick, it's not flexible, a material that is durable so that it's consistent, not too glossy, not too satin, so that it feels comfortable whether my hands are hot and clammy or cold and dry. And I like the shoulders of the pick to be blunt so that I have more surface contact when I'm hitting the strings parallel like that. The plane of the pick is parallel with the string. Other things that I'll just briefly mention, but some people even hold the pick in different fingers. Like a jazz guitar player, Mike Moreno, holds the pick between his thumb and middle finger, and the index finger is kind of along for the ride, or like touches the edge of the pick there. Eddie Van Halen would also do that a lot when he was doing his tremolo picking technique. He would hold the pick there, and if you notice, if you hold the pick between your thumb and your middle finger, it's like your middle finger is directly in line with the center of your wrist, so that actually, if you're using this twisting motion to pick, that's actually one of the most efficient ways to do it. So if that feels comfortable, maybe try that. But most guitar players are going to hold between thumb and index finger. So experiment with all of those things. Experiment with different kinds of picks. Let me briefly just play like a jazz line on all of these and see if you can tell a difference. So here's teardrop shape. That was the point. Let's try it backwards, the rounded edge. I don't know if you could hear a difference there, but it definitely felt stiffer when I used the rounded edge. So like a heavier gauge pick. Here's the Fender and here's the point. And here's the rounded edge by holding it backwards. Okay, that sounded brighter to me because there's a little bit more flex to it. Here's the Golden Gate extra stiff pick. And it has 3 sides. The upper sides are actually a little bit sharper, but I didn't try using them really. And here's my modified ProPlec. Some people would just call it a bass pick. So it has a very rounded edge and it's very stiff. I can tell right away that that first note, even if I'm a little bit sloppy and I hit it too hard, it's a little bit darker than all the others. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed. We will talk about some other topics another time. Thanks for listening. See ya. Bye.